So thank you everyone for joining us. So we're having another episode of EdTech Connect, and we're excited to chat with you all today because I think we are really at an inflection point in education where we understand that AI is no longer being viewed in just pilot programs or as sort of future state conversations. It's really already being embedded in classrooms and on EdTech platforms, and really just decisions that are happening at school-wide levels. And so I think when when I was chatting with our guests here today a little bit earlier, we're really thinking about the question here is not whether to use AI, but thinking about if we're really building the right foundations to use AI in the right and ways that are ethical and that actually serve learners, students, and families. So that's what we're getting into today. But just to do some intros here, I'm Olivia. This is EdTech Connect brought to you by Magic EdTech. So we'll be talking today about data, not just as a back-end concern, but as the really strategic core of everything that education depends on. I have two incredible guests with me today. So I have Vida Williams here. She's the Chief Data Officer at Stride K-12. And she's been thinking of the relationship between data, humanity, and ethics longer than most of us have been paying attention. So if you haven't seen her TEDx talk on citizen data, go find it. Vida, I don't know if you know that I watched that one, but
did you watch it?
I did. It was you were thinking of these questions along, before I was really thinking about how important they are. So we'll get into the nitty gritty of that. But I think that the questions you were asking in that TED Talk and just throughout your role at Stride are really kind of the questions that I'm seeing the industry scrambling to answer now. So I'm excited to be chatting with you.
Yeah. Awesome.
And then we're also joined by Harish Agarwal. So he is the head of data and AI solutions at Magic EdTech. And Harish works on the infrastructure and systems side of making sure that AI actually can work in education in both a responsible way and at scale. So Vida and Harish, great to have both of you here.
Glad to be here.
So we're going to be exploring what it really means to be AI first in education. And so when we think about that, how we kind of can actually scale responsibly, but we need to think about what needs to be done before that. And also, I think spend some time talking about where human judgment is especially important. And so where those processes need to account for that. So before we really get into some of the impact, I wanted to align us and our listeners here on definitions. And so really thinking about I've mentioned AI first, but what does it actually mean in an education context? And Vida, I'll turn that to you. When we think about AI first, what does that mean?
So I answer it from two perspectives, because I think the popular perspective is we think AI and we think of generative AI and we think of large language models and we think of the ability to construct my homework, right? Like those are the things that come first out of the gate. And I think where we are from a technologist perspective, from whether we're representing the practice of data or whether we're representing the practice of software development, we now have to take a step back and ask the industry to rethink about that definition as one that is data-centric utility, one that is going to bridge the gap between the learner's opportunities to use technology pedagogically to reach an optimal state of understanding topics or subjects or whatever we want to say. And I'm not sure that we've made that leap yet, to be honest, Kiara. I think that we're still in the space of designing. I know we are here still in the space of designing that very specifically as utility. But I think when we start moving in that direction, then we also empower our educators and our administrators, as well as our students and parents, to demand more of the products so that the products aren't just, from a probabilistic perspective, answering a question that was already known, into asking more probing opportunities to learn differently and to extend learning further than what we currently understand. And so the utility part of AI is actually older than the popular understanding of what AI is. We've been building machine learning capabilities for a very long time. And so I think we're in this place now where if we don't, people like Harish and I don't take that next leap forward and build systemic utility with the pedagogical base, then we're selling ed tech short because we'll just generate known information. Does that make sense?
No, that's a helpful way to reframe it and just kind of think, taking that step back, where are we actually coming from before we think future forward? And Harish, I just want to pass it to you. Any commentary or thoughts on that?
Oh, that's absolutely, extremely well said, Vida. Uh, one big problem that I'm currently seeing in the industry is sticking AI on top of your existing products and processes.
Yes.
And when we say AI first, it actually, one way we encourage our customers to think about is, imagine if you didn't have this current product or process and you were designing it in today's world, how would you design it? So sometimes rethinking the whole product or the whole process in today's environment, with the knowledge that today the child has access to all kinds of AI, not just one, multiple different large language models, and you have access to a lot of their data. So how do you want to leverage all of this together in helping the student? So I think that is where the AI first comes from. And to Vida's point, like an AI first approach actually requires a very strong data foundation. Otherwise, you will end up just using generative AI and rehashing the same information. So, and a lot of times you'll find organizations' data is siloed, messy, unstructured, does not talk to each other, is not connected. And that's where I think the AI first kind of terminology requires you to think about all of these problems and perhaps design the right solution.
So when I think about, something you're just mentioning, bringing up Gen AI specifically, I think about there's lots of conversations on the amount of AI generated content and how that's then being reused for training and just where are we going from the future in terms of where do we make sure that the quality of our inputs, our outputs are actually maintaining them? And I think that, that's maybe to some extent a slightly different conversation as we're thinking about just the internet as a whole and where this data is coming from. I think that it's important to think about it when we are talking about school systems and education platforms that can have some more of that control on where the data comes from, how we actually think about that. And so I wanted to think about, as we talked about, from the beginning, now that we hear many organizations say they want to scale AI, and Harish, you mentioned like it shouldn't just be putting AI on top of what you're building, but actually scaling AI. What are some of the things that organizations need to think about so that they can actually be doing this process of leveraging AI in a responsible way? Vida, I'll turn it to you first.
So I draw a very hard line with my development teams. So let me start there, because my expectation at every level of practice is that you know how to fundamentally do the work that you're being asked to do. And the way that I explain it to my senior leaders as they're constructing these teams is, can they drive a stick? Most people can accomplish driving an automatic. And when we're talking about the capability of generating new technologies off of existing technologies, which basically is kind of how we're using AI in these spaces, if they don't have those core fundamental principles of being able to design systems, then it will erode over time. Now, why is that important? Because as we went in to start designing for educational utility, we started with what were the data tranches that we had. And instead of allowing AI to generate on top of them or to use an LLM as a pass-through to surface them, what we did is we started designing for what was the outcome that we needed. And a practical perspective of that is, if a student is planning to graduate and we know that they have to pass the state test in order to graduate, and each state has their own test, then can we calibrate the curriculum that is required per student, per state, and provide that in a utility to help them not just graduate, but to use the utility to learn the concepts that they're required to learn in order to graduate. That's a different design principle that you can't get if you just as Horace says, you put an LLM on top of what currently exists. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't use as technologists AI to help the process go a little bit faster. Yeah, but that's still using it as a utility because I have already understood the principles of design that we have. Now compound that with education. When we're building these design systems, it is important that we get the expertise built into that system. So our educators are a wealth of knowledge and information about the pedagogical impact of certain. What we don't want is for the use of AI to result in cognitive decline at the same time resulting in answered questions. What we want is for the utility to enforce cognitive rigor as they learn to answer the questions that are before them. Most importantly, critical thinking. So, how do we import the educational pedagogy against the tranche of known knowledge, against the actual state standard to make it practical, and then deploy a system that way? That requires human ingenuity, which we tend to want to not think is in that whole AI practice, even in the tech space. But without it, we would not well serve the student. Does that resonate? Like that's
Yeah.
kind of the practice that we use.
Well, it's here.
I think specifically hearing you talk about, not, I'm going to paraphrase, but sort of risking cognitive decline in the pursuit of answering the question. So the end goal can't just be, can the student answer the question? It has to be, measuring their cognitive ability or skills that they're building. And so designing for that. I can't drive a stick, so now I'm thinking about how I need to start, taking those backup steps. But I think that it's a good analogy and a motivational one for me. But Harish, I just wanted to turn it to you and hear your thoughts.
Sure. So, I mean, when we talk about scaling AI, what we are largely talking about, if there is a lot of people or organizations started building a lot of proof of concepts and pilots and feel very happy about what they have achieved with that pilot. But when it comes to deploying it for, let's say, 1 million students, that's where the AI doesn't scale. The model that whatever small model that they deployed does not work because it requires a lot more data and training and edge cases to be tested before you actually take it to a mass scale. And that's where as we discussed earlier as well, your data pipelines, the entire ecosystem talking to each other becomes extremely important. And how are you testing your models? How are you ensuring that when it actually is put into use, when it goes into production for 1 million students, let's say, does it really solve the same problem for a lot of different users? And in K-12 and in education, the problems are unique in the sense we are not like, if you are launching product for an adult user base, like, at least almost everyone is at the same level, but you are dealing with a 7-year-old and a 15-year-old on the same platform. So the problem in educations are different and we need to understand and tackle them differently. And that's where scaling AI for education is a different problem than perhaps outside the industry.
I would say if I could tag on to the end of that, it's also managing. So in office, we say AI hallucinates 100% of the time and gets it right occasionally, right? So in education, you can't have a probabilistic service that is going to indicate, a yes, or a binary answer or, so the accuracy and how often you can generate accuracy becomes exceptionally important. But also, when you think about that in terms of engineering or architecting for scale, you have to be modular enough to be able to test that model that when it starts hallucinating or when it misbehaves, you can offline it without pulling everything down. And so that type of architecture is while it's rooted, I'm old enough to know that we did a lot of this stuff already. We just called it different things. I earned the gray hair up there. But I think it's taking those principles into new contexts. And so modularity and architecture is once again really the fundamental basis for us to be able to scale appropriately on so many different levels. But I would say that it shouldn't be lost on us that, especially when we're dealing with models, and those models are almost always, I've not met one yet, however, that is not built on a statistical probability. And as long as you're doing that and you're educating, it better be right more often than a teacher is going to be wrong.
Yeah.
And it has to not misbehave in the middle of a conversation. And that misbehavior is ranked at different ages, right? Because what you can say to a 15-year-old, you can't say to a 6-year-old. So how do you calibrate your infrastructure that way? And that goes back to building at scale that way, which requires a great deal of modularity that enables you to decommission without disturbance. And
Yeah.
that's a pretty complex problem statement for architects these days. Well, especially in the education space.
And we'll add one more point that typically in a non-AI system, in non-AI world, you would deploy, you would test, you'll deploy,
Yeah.
and you'll monitor, right? But in the world of AI, you can't just monitor. You need to keep testing and ensuring that the model is continuously is giving correct. The monitoring is not just if the server is up and running. The monitoring is also if the conversation is going correctly or not.
That's right.
Has AI stopped answering the question where it knows the answer, and it has happened so many times in systems wherein AI knows the answer or it should have known the answer, but is saying that I don't know or is giving a wrong answer. So that also needs to be monitored.
Good.
I really liked, as you guys were talking, I was just thinking a lot about the kind of comparison of AI, the AI system, whatever the tool is, needs to be right more often than the teacher is going to be wrong. And just thinking about that as a way to just, I think, a framework for thinking about, always introducing tools that are going to do more good than they're going to do harm. Thinking about that, the oath that doctors take, right? It's like, we're still, you guys both were mentioning the word experimentation. We're still, and we'll always be iterating and experimenting, but how do we, think about our plans there?
I mean, I think the do no harm part of this, and I'm a huge advocate that every data practitioner needs to have that undergirding, the ethic that they are in practice too, especially right now though, and especially in my industry, when you understand that you are working with children, you're working with youngsters, and you are helping using a utility to shape their worldview, whether it's basic, 1+1=2, or it's helping to shape their cosmology, even if you think about the intersection of history and English and art and how they're combining these things. The do no harm becomes exceptionally explicit, not implicit anymore, because you're taking information from the student and you're giving back the student information. And so I just, I've been impressing upon my peers to understand that we have more than at any other time, and this was always going to be where we got to. If we were going to start harvesting data and we were going to start using it to talk to itself, then when we started engaging with humans again, we better be right about it. Because it's not unidirectional anymore, it's bidirectional, and we need to make sure that that's a fine-tuned interaction. And I don't know, honestly, that we've arrived to a place where we can quantify and measure fine-tuned. And I think that's the undergirding fear that we have in our population. I think is a good tension for us to sit in, but I know as architects and builders of these systems, it is one that needs to be explicitly our mantra of do no harm within. And I know that you didn't ask that question, but I thought I'd use that moment to soapbox because EdTech is different. It's different. It's a different animal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I think that, just a lot of what I've been hearing you talk about is just how to think about the work that we're doing. And then we can get into the actual work itself. But I do think it's important. And in the day-to-day time, there's not always these moments to really think about the why behind it, the guiding principles. And so it sounds like with your team, that's something you really impress upon them.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah. We
Well,
are
and
we do weekly readings on it.
I think, okay, that's something I need to get that syllabus because that's something I'm going to need to be learning a little bit more about. Well, and that actually
Mhm.
does bring me to the next question I just want to ask you about, and specifically thinking about, your role as the chief data officer. How have you seen that changing over the last, 5 or so years, just and across whether it's your role specifically or just your peers as AI is becoming more embedded across these institutional systems, educational systems, and
Yeah.
institutions.
I think for me, and I'd be interested in an alternative point of view. So I grew up as just a technologist. There was a great deal period of time where all of us were kind of the same. We were all working in data. We were all building everything all the time. And I think the separation or the when data was becoming an industry in and of itself was probably about 15 years ago. And that's because the incentivizations are different. When you're investing in data, you're investing in an outcome, you're investing for something. That is the whole reason to invest in it all. And whether you're saying it's going to move, your business more effectively, more efficiently, whatever the case may be, your whole reason for investing millions of dollars in your data infrastructure 15 years ago was to move the business in a direction. IT is actually incentivized to cost contain. They're in conflict with each other, and that became, the first vestiges of the split, in my humble opinion, when you think about the 50-year arc that popular technology is. And so now when you think about that and you look at the trajectory of data, we're no longer thinking about the containers that the data sits in when we're talking about data warehouses versus data lakes or the swamps that I call them. 'Cause I'm like, once it goes in, it gets a little murky, and needing to make sure that you can have methodology for clarification. All right. So then we spent a whole decade trying to do that. I think where we are now is on the other side of that, where now we're talking about data centric innovation as opposed to software innovation. The software innovation now is at the behest of where we think the data is indicating innovation. That is a trajectory that I am so proud to have been part of for the whole of that trajectory. And I think where we're seeing chief executives right now, especially in the data space, and I would challenge all of us at various stages in our career to understand, when do you want to get your fingers off the keyboard and start being an executive that actually makes the decision on what comes out of those methodologies, right? And so that's where the seat of responsibility is very, very necessary. And our peers of like, we can't do life without them. There's always the CFO, always, because.
It's
Um,
necessary.
but I often tell my CISOs, and I love them, that the whole reason they exist is to keep me safe, right? And so to make sure that we're working closely together, because the only people that will try to hack into a large enterprise is to go get the information that's in that enterprise to do something with it. And then my IT peers to ensure that we have fidelity in terms of being able to architect for it. So I think we're starting to see a reforming, a reorganizing between our three entities, because we are incentivized differently by the business, and the expectations of investment in each one of these areas is different. And I think that CEOs, CFOs are together starting to see the three of us as different entities, whereas 15 years ago, many of us wore multiple hats at once. And that expertise would kind of be diluted on the total scale of operations that we had responsibility for. Um,
Yeah.
so that's how I see it.
I mean, I think, and I appreciate that you're bringing in the perspective of sort of the entire C-suite and just thinking about
Oh yeah.
the role that each role, the responsibilities each role includes. I think that it's helpfully thinking about, if each group, department, role is kind of keeping a specific perspective, that's where you see the best collaboration,
Yes.
because all the different perspectives that need to be included, whether it's sort of on the more innovative experimental side or the sort of safety cost constraint
That's
side, the more, yeah. So I think just thinking about how your role fits within that scope is really a helpful, way to think about it as we're moving forward. Harish, I wanted to just ask you, you have a slightly different perspective because I think you work really closely with a lot of chief data officers and other institutions, leaders at institutions. And so I'm curious from your perspective, how has working with folks in these roles shifted as their responsibilities have either expanded or become, even to Vida's point, more refined and wearing less hats, but really focusing on specific verticals? And how are you seeing those roles shifting from your perspective and working with those?
So traditionally, data ownership was with IT teams, as Vida also initially alluded to. And over like 10 years or so, at least for large institutions, they started thinking about data ownership as separately. But then it was more from the perspective of data privacy and ensuring that the data is not hacked. It was not getting ROI from the data. It is still the data ownership, or the role is still focused a little bit more on cybersecurity, data privacy, data governance, that aspect of data, rather than thinking about leveraging data for decision making, for let's say how do I ensure that this data is used to for improving the student outcomes, for personalizing education for each student, because that's what is needed. So I think, and this is where I think a lot of institutions are struggling with their data warehouse implementations, is because they are still seeing dashboards. They are still only seeing dashboards which are static, which shows them something. Still there is a lot of issues with quality of data, and whatever dashboards they are seeing, there is very little confidence on those dashboards as well, because different groups are still bringing in different, something as simple as enrollment. You get different answers from different groups within the organization, within the institutions. So I think there is still a lot of work to be done for the chief data officers of those institutions, and they realize their responsibility now, that they need to be not just part of IT team, they need to be part of instructional strategy, they need to be part of product design, which products are procured, how they consume data, who they share their data, because earlier they were not even asking that question when they were buying, let's say, an LMS. They were not asking like what about the data ownership? Can I pull data? Can I, So a lot of this important things are being asked now, but not everyone is asking them, and there is still a lot of gap between some of the large institutions versus mid institutions, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done still.
So I appreciate that, there's the candid reality about where we've been, where we are, and also, what needs to happen, where we're going. And so as we kind of close out, I wanted to just ask you guys a question that I think might be applicable to really anyone, whether they are building AI tools or whether they're in the seat of trying to determine what tools to procure from either in the classroom, from a district standpoint. What is one question that you think every educational leaders should ask before approving an AI tool, whether that's to build out, from a product team or to actually approve and use in their school systems?
Does it empower or does it replace the human interaction?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really just, so much of schools, and we haven't spent, I think a lot of educational conversations focus on so much of schools, the relationship building piece. And so hearing you think about that empowerment piece is really helpful. And Harish, any thoughts on the questions that maybe as you're working with teams, what you encourage them to think about asking or that their clients may ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think that worry is always there, that will it stop students from thinking critically? And will they start the AI dependence, right? AI addiction or the AI dependence, will it kind of reduce our critical thinking abilities? And since we are dealing with children, we are dealing with the future leadership of countries and of the world. We need to be very, very conscious of that question, and I think it's a good question to ask. And I think educators, buyers in the education institutes are asking that question. In fact, they are now saying, more and more people are saying that we do not want anything that says do my homework. Right? uh, so I don't want to do my homework button. So lot of systems need to be built thinking in mind that do not answer the questions, encourage student to think, ask more questions about what they are struggling with, understand what they are struggling with first, and like maybe move more towards the uh, question based approach rather than answer based approach of teaching.
Yeah.
It's an important question that, I myself am doing with my own tools, right? Making sure I'm maintaining some of that friction for my own decision-making process. So I think on both ends, just really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you both have on just your experience in, the data space, and then also how that really is impacting, the variety of innovation that can be happening now. And just appreciate your thoughtfulness behind the work that you're doing.
It's exciting work. It's scary work, but it is exciting work. So I wouldn't be anywhere else.
Well, I think after this conversation, I feel much better knowing that you are one of the people behind that, really about, just what the students are experiencing, how education really shapes their worldview.
Yeah. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you both. Yeah, thank you both so much for joining us, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. Have a good one.